So, Duke had this coal ash spill in North Carolina. They're now investigating all their coal ash ponds. I don't know if that's in Indiana or just North Carolina. We've asked, but every power generating facility that burns coal should be inspected. Somebody should be making sure those are safe, because there is a danger, and it's not a question. I heard IDEM's water chief say it's not a question of if this will happen, it's when. Because it has happened in the past, and nothing is fail safe. And so, those ponds are all over the state. Right. And the Pines, a town along the Indiana National Lakeshore up in northwest Indiana, has had its entire drinking water contaminated in that town. They were all on wells because NIPSCO dumped a bunch of coal ash in that town. They even used it on roadway beds, and they have a big pile of it, and that groundwater just went right down toward the town of Pines and contaminated their groundwater, and EPA had to come in, and now all those folks are on different water, and so we know that coal ash disposal, it's actually I believe it's the second by volume, second largest waste in the country after municipal trash.
There are about 550 of these ponds scattered across the United States.
Yeah.
We've got time for a couple more questions before we go to our next speaker. And then Jodi, hopefully we can get a time for you to come back, and I can converse with you about what works best with your schedule. But Pat, you got a question?
I just want to make a similar comment as I made a couple of months ago, and that is they've got these coal ash ponds that they've dug down, and they're just on the north side of 465. Just on the south side of 465 is the 5-year flow limit for the well fields that supply a third of central Indiana's drinking water. So it's not, in my mind, it's not just people who have wells living near this that have to worry about it or spills. It's people who run a tap and pay a bill to Citizens Water at this point. And I wanted to bring to your attention, I believe that they used coal ash to fill some low ground in Mooresville. If you go down State Road 67, there's a little shopping area at Indiana Street, and they filled that, and they've got some kind of trees in there now. It's still a low ground, but if someone's monitoring water down in Mooresville, that might be a place to be of concern.
Yeah, and there was a big coal ash spill in Tennessee a few years back that destroyed some homes, and that raised a national call for EPA to regulate this, the disposal of coal ash, and they did. They studied all the coal ash disposal. We're still waiting, more than 5 years later, I think almost 6 years later, for EPA to come out with some regulations on coal ash disposal. And there's arguments over whether it's a hazardous waste, a special waste, because there are, some uses that you can recycle. Like if you put it in concrete and it's not going to be, exposed to water, it's not soluble, that would be an okay, second use of coal ash. But they're also putting it in like drywall, which I'm concerned about. Especially when you think about, it's not like that drywall is always, people do demolition and, knock things out, and then what are your children exposed to? So EPA's been, we've been waiting and waiting for EPA to regulate coal ash. It's really kind of crazy because of the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, hazardous waste laws. Power plants got a pass when they were first written, and now they're having to comply for the first time, and everyone's complaining about this war on coal. Well, no, really, it's they have to meet the same environmental laws that everybody else has had to meet, and to protect our health. That's why it's there. So
the EPA studies, I might just add, several years ago found that there was almost uniform violation of standards for containment and management of these ponds. So it's a significant national as well as Indiana problem. The question is what do we do about it?
Yeah.
That's what
Right.
Jodi's mentioned. So
Right.
it was not a question of whether there's a problem or not.
Yeah, and I've looked at the IPL, the studies of the IPL coal ash ponds, in particular Harding Street, and what EPA found in its first review was no inspections, no record that anyone had gone out to test, to look at the security and the safety of those levees, no emergency action plan in case there was a spill, no groundwater monitoring or any of that kind of stuff going on. So it's neglected, and that's why somebody needs to come in and set some rules and some ground rules for this kind of stuff, because every time you are throwing coal ash in the ground, it's polluting the land, it's polluting the groundwater or rivers.
Well, Jodi, I'm going to conclude with this. I was raised by a science fiction junkie. My mom would watch any kind of science fiction, but I think that when you are making presentations to the general public, you are always going to find people who understand from a public health standpoint, from an environmental standpoint, why it's critical that we address this. But then there are going to be people that are going to reduce it to economics. And so we're watching this movie called The Day After Tomorrow a couple of nights ago, where they're talking about what's going to happen when the environment goes sideways. And there's the vice president in that thing says, well, it's going to cost us too much money to do that. And so I think to be able to provide some empirical data to people when they talk about, well, it's going to cost too much. We need to be able to tell people what is it going to cost us in dollars if we don't address this. What is it going to cost us in terms of public health? For I work with children and we see more and more cases of asthma. What is it going to cost us in terms of economic development if we have businesses who don't want to locate here because our air is too dirty? And so, like I said, the data that talks about the public health and the environment, that's good, but I think in order to get this really rolling, we're going to have to be able to prove people that, it's going to cost, it's going to be an economic factor. It's, it's going to be dollars out of your pocket, whether you live next to this coal plant or not.
Yeah, and maybe when I come back, we can talk about that a little bit more too, in addition to the coal ash issues. But like I said, when we presented to the Utility Regulatory Commission last year, we demonstrated using IPL's numbers that it will cost more to keep putting money into that plant over the next 20 years than it would to retire it and make a change.
And I think people need to see that.
Yeah, and that'll be part of this 20-year plan that IPL is working on this year. They have to look at, what's the future going to look like in terms of regulations and what's the electricity demand going to be, and then what are different options that they could use to meet those demands. And they're going to, the problem is a lot of that information ends up being confidential because they're not a government agency, they're a investor-owned utility, and they can claim business confidentiality for some of that. But our job will be to try to get as much of that information as we can into the public realm and show, that their plan versus a clean energy plan, and not what the clean energy plan would cost, and not just in terms of our rate dollars, but all the other issues that you talked about in terms of the future of our city and our health. And health costs and those kinds of things. So
The health costs are just enormous.
yeah.
So if you decrease the pollution we're talking about here, you're reducing the rates of heart attacks, strokes, and all of the things that we know that are very, very expensive. So your point is just right on target. We need to do a better job of informing people the extent of those costs currently today, and then further what will happen if we reduce the pollution further.
I think when people think about the health costs, like I said, I work with small children, and so, it's obvious, okay, you have a child that's asthmatic, to handle it requires medication sometimes and hospital visits, but then there are all those ancillary costs, okay, you got a little boy with an asthma attack, mom misses 3 days of work, what's that costing her employer? What's that costing her family in terms of being able to meet their bills? So I think that, a lot of times it's easy to dismiss this because, that's just those, bleeding heart tree huggers that think everything is bad. But there are some really serious hard dollar costs that everybody's going to have to experience.
And my friends in the health department know that asthma is the #1 cause of school absenteeism in Indiana. So if kids are not in school, that's a cost too.
Well, Jodi, thank you
Yeah, thank
very,
you.
very much for coming in, to you also for coming. And we would welcome you back, and I'll get with you for a date to do that.
Okay.